sam mermage sarambola yatsan choge nurune merma june jesura kodu kadu mamba gu jeji jesu da jubji jinji labji jesu so guru perma siri nujabsam mermage sarambola yatsan choye nurune merma june jesura gordu kadru mamba gu jeji jesu da jubji jinji labji jesu so guru perma Jabsam mermage sarambola yatsan choge nurune merma june jesura godu kadru mamba gu jeji jesu da jubji jinji labji jesu so necho diru jimbura duja dala wanje gu geran la jemba jetso huran tumon nuruzo. At the northwest border of the land of Odiana, on the pollen stem of a lotus flower, you obtained the marvelous supreme city, gloriously renowned as Lotus Born. You are surrounded by countless dakinis. I practice following your path. I beseech you, come and empower me. Empower this supreme place. Confer the 4 empowerments on me, the supreme practitioner. Eliminate the forces which oppose, disturb, or interrupt. Grant me the supreme and ordinary cities. Invocation to the great Guru of Odiana, otherwise known as the 7-line supplication or something along those lines. A little bit different than the 7-line supplication, but in the same concept. It is an invocation. This is Darren Littlejohn. Welcome to episode 76 of the 12-Step Buddhist Podcast, Release Your Anger, and continuing with Practices of a Bodhisattva, number 33. Desire for gain and honor leads to arguments, and activities of listening, reflecting, and meditating decline. Therefore, to relinquish attachment to the households of friends, relatives, and sponsors is the practice of a bodhisattva. We can look at this on the sort of relative and objective level and say, okay, yeah, all of that stuff about, acquiring material gain and all that kind of thing, and money and getting a big portfolio and getting a lot of possessions and all that, that's not as important as my spiritual practice. And that's true. But really, if we take it deep within ourselves and we look at desire in the context of attachment, in the context of attachment gone wild, as addiction, and then the processes that we understand that happen within us when we get into the cycle of addiction, when we begin to plan and execute and get the substance and participate in the ritualistic activity, ingestion, or however, consumption of the material. Sam Harris, in a new book, was talking about this idea of our relationship to drugs and pointed out an interesting fact, namely that drugs, if you want to call them drugs, but things that are called drugs, such as psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, and so on, are therapeutic, beneficial, helpful, and the first two don't have an addictive nature. However, there's people in prison and there's people who've suffered in the shame that we have all gone through. We were beaten down by the man from the beginning. I mean, we were beaten. The whole concept of awakening through chemicals and so forth was so terrifying to the conservative establishment and institutions and whatever forces behind them keep things in place. I mean, there are bigger forces. I don't know. Sometimes it seems like it, but who knows? But getting into the desire aspect of there being nothing, starting from nothing, knowing nothing is nothing. Sam Harris's point was that we have this relationship and set of rules for certain drugs that are actually beneficial and not addictive, and then we have other drugs that nicotine and alcohol that are practiced and indulged in worldwide, and really everybody knows they're super harmful and super bad. There's just nothing good about taking a drink of alcohol. There's nothing good about having a cigarette at all, but it's totally accepted. So we have this different view, and I do have this in mind as I'm writing. I feel like we have a different view. We change our view of things, change our relationship to something. And this is the practice of the Bodhisattva. We turn around, we transform the relationship instead of trying to acquire. So that's really the thing. If you look at the human body and the anatomy, it's really designed to move forward. It's designed to move, and everything in the brain supports that. Moving forward to seek is what our whole entire system, all of our systems and human subsystems, are about. Moving forward, acquiring, gaining, however, whatever it is, at whatever level, food, etc., going on up the ladder to whatever needs. We're meant to go for it, and we're not really built to chill. We're not really built to sit still. If we want that, most of us take a drink or a pill, and we wind up in AA, and they say, oh, but it's God's will. Not to poo-poo that, but let's get into a context that we can understand, please. It's really what I've been working on for quite a number of years. So it says here that, desire for gain and honor. Desire for gain. Gain of what? To gain means to acquire. To acquire means to have something that needs to be acquired and someone that needs to do the acquiring. Someone who has the need and the subject and the object of need. So there's a thing and I really want it. That's desire. I want that thing. So if there's no thing separate from an I that wants a thing, then there's no desire. So we eradicate the desire realm. Now I can say that in one pithy sentence, and that's a pithy sentence. It's you can unpack that. But what we're talking about is nothing. We're at the point and position, understanding in our Dharma practice that we have a nice deep inhale, fill it up like a balloon, let the throat be a little bit open and relaxed, and just exhale, let it go, don't push it out. And it's from here that we're going to notice we have to get into a space where we can notice the subtlety of our energy. And so our awareness is already pure. Awareness is already pure from the beginning. It has no beginning end. Awareness can't, be touched or perfected or broken, right? So it's not the awareness that we don't need to create awareness. Awareness is, we are awareness. So in this awareness, we can notice. But if we're too busy and uncultivated in our training, if we haven't cultivated and developed the skill to notice, you got to notice when stuff's arising. And that's called listening, reflecting, and meditating. And, that stuff is kind of hard. It says arguments ensue. Desire for gain and honor leads to arguments. Well, obviously, because I want my stuff. I want what I think is mine. And if there wasn't the desire for gain, then we wouldn't be having a fight. If I'm practicing Tonglen, exchanging self for others, I'm taking all your pain, I'm giving you all of my happiness. But this isn't how most of us live, and we've got a lot of anger, and anger affects the body. So we're going to the New York Times from December 17th, 2022, an article entitled How Anger Affects the Body. Lost your cool? Your heart, brain, and gut are taking notice. And this is a 3-minute read, and the link is on the show notes at podcast.compassionaterecovery.us by Gina Charelis. If your chill was nowhere to be found this year, you're not alone. Public life and personal hardships provided ample fodder for flare-ups, which, in addition to costing your cool, can also take a more serious toll. According to scientists, prolonged and extreme anger can also exacerbate existing health problems, as well as affect the way we react to certain issues. Throughout the day and throughout the week and throughout the month, we're activating these systems during times of frustration, anger, or rage that in the short run might help you in an emergency situation, said Dr. Elon Shore-Wittstein, a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. But in the long run, it might be quite detrimental to how these neurohormonal systems are activated as often as they are for those cases. Anger responses can cause a ripple effect throughout the body from the cardiovascular system to your nervous system. It's all fair game. Well, in AA, we say anger is the dubious luxury of normal men, right? So it is a health problem. Anger is a health issue. And, I realize this because when I'm sitting really still and I notice that I've got stress at the core and then, my heart's a little bit more agitated and the valve isn't working exactly as it normally should, this is directly related to a level of stress that's impacted. And if you don't realize how keyed up and ready to roll you are, like just think internally, you're sort of, at the top of a downhill ski, you're on the top of a black steep run, a double diamond, super steep run if you're not a skier, or you're on, on the top of an Olympic chute or jumping out of a plane. I mean, you really have to have some. So just imagine that instead of sitting in a nice lotus position or savasana after a yoga class, your body may be there, but your energy and your mind is really ready to jump off the edge there and shoot down the run. You're really geared up. You're prepared. Your systems are in a state of readiness and alert. And if your anger is fight or flight, we know this if you read in Compassionate Recovery, these types of brain systems that are operating at all times, affecting the stress, the long-term acute effects of this hyper stress of always being fighting, always being against, always revved up, always feeling like the victim, always fighting against, never moving with the flow. You're opposing. Well, you're opposing, or you're trying to acquire, or you're pushing people out of the way, or this is the modality of the human anatomy and energy structure to go forward. What we're trying to do is meditate, reflect, and chill. Notice the totality of space rather than the rage, and know that it's affecting you, and feel it, and know in your body, and know your body so well through your somatic practices like Tai Chi and even swimming, something, jogging, walking, whatever you can do. It's going to give you need to practice body awareness though when you are doing these activities. Continuing, the heart. According to Dr. Wittstein, an expert in stress cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome, one way to think about the heart is to imagine a house. There can be issues with the pipes, doors, or the electrical system, but the house itself might seem fine. Note, there's a link to broken heart syndrome, and that's interesting. You may want to check the article and go into a little bit deeper with Dr. Wittstein. Continuing, rage can have effects on the arteries that supply blood on the heart. It can have an effect on the electrical system specifically that tells the heart when to beat. And it can have an effect specifically on the heart muscle itself. So if you're already living with conditions that affect the cardiovascular system, such as high blood pressure, abnormal heart rhythms, or high cholesterol, moments of extreme anger may leave you more vulnerable to a sudden heart attack. Now, we have to understand this. I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are. If you have some genetic predispositions to some of these types of conditions, and if you don't, when you're young and you have all kinds of attitude and drive and don't really notice any effects of things like anger, later you notice the intensity of the energy and that motion that you put forward in hindsight. At least this is true for me and many other people that I listen very carefully to these views and observations of life looking back, down the path. You can take a look at how those anger episodes, regardless of what level of anger you experience, these episodes have an impact, and we can really see it. And now, the earlier and the sooner that we can start to practice this, even in childhood, this article talks about it, even training our children to be mindful and careful and compassionate and aware, knowing these things can have a life impact because the kid's not going to know it, just like we didn't know it until they're too old to do anything about it. Oops, I figured it out. Now I'm in a bad spot, later on in life. So rage can have effects on the arteries over time. Continuing, when you're filled with rage, Dr. Wittstein offered as an example, blood pressure can increase, blood vessels can constrict, inflammatory cells are released by the immune system. All of this can lead to the rupturing of plaque inside the coronary artery. If that plaque forms a clot, blood supply in that portion of the heart can be cut off, and that can either cause a heart attack that lands a person in the hospital, or a person can even drop dead of a sudden heart attack, he said. Let that sink in. You can get pissed off and die because you're getting carried away. Maybe not. Is it ever going to be when you expect? It would be sooner than we think whenever it happens, regardless of what age we're at. So if you think, oh, it couldn't happen to me, think about the long-term effect. Keep things flowing. Just look at a car from the 80s. And that's going to be you in about 30 years if you're 20 now. So take a look at it. You can keep good care of things and keep them running a little bit better. That's why I did, a decade of solid yoga and fitness over there. Continuing the brain. In a sense, anger can have a positive physical effect in that it can help motivate you to get up and do something. When we're angry and aroused, our brains are primed for fast reactions. If there's danger or a social threat that triggers an angry state, we are more likely to act on it. The fight or flight response, as we mentioned. And I wrote Compassionate Recovery. We have the whole diagrams and explanations of the different parts of the brain, how that works. Really simple, easy, clear language, short paragraphs, short sentences, ideas that are clear with no extraneous bullshit so that you can understand the stuff and talk about it and not get bogged down in the details of the scientists who learned it. I just have to translate it so that it's a little bit easier to understand for myself and, pass that along. Continuing, because the fight or flight response is key to our discussion of adverse childhood experiences, addiction, and the solutions, such as our compassion training that we're doing with the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. One possible trade-off in that agitated state, we're less likely to make good judgments, to listen for certain information, and to be attuned to other motivations that are important for humans like values, said Dr. Royce Lee, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience at the University of Chicago. You might often hear a person in an angry state say or do something that they don't really like, Dr. Lee said, and when they're not angry, they will regret it and wish they didn't do that. Does anyone have an 8th step list? Made a list of all persons we had harmed. You remember from a Buddhist perspective, the 8th step list would be going back, beginningless lifetimes of accumulating negativities. And if you think about the impact of how much we regret one bad word or negative, hurtful thing, stupid thing we said, imagine the accumulated suffering and karma of zillions of billions of trillions of them. We have it. You don't have to imagine it because that's the karmic density of our manifestation. Talk about wishing you didn't do it. Wish you don't do it on an enlightenment ad infinitum level, or you're not just thinking about an incident. You're pulling back the lens and you're saying, getting that global perspective, having a clearer view of the big picture. According to Dr. Orly Eitingen, an internist at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell, anger and chronic stress also affects our memory, causing it to, quote, not work very well, unquote. Forget about the fact that you're probably sleep deprived too, she added, but you definitely cannot pay good attention to things. We get a brain fog because the prefrontal cortex information, which says, hey, I want to think about stuff. I've got time. I'm going to mull it over. Instead, your whole I'm going to get hit by a bus or a train response kicks in. There's no focus there in the thinking part of the brain. It all goes into that fight or flight. So you're not really thinking, you're not really making super great decisions. The gut. You might have heard about the gut-brain connection, the much-discussed link between our emotions and our stomach. Like other feelings, anger and rage can trigger gastrointestinal discomfort, malabsorption of food, and loss of appetite. The GI tract is made up of muscle tissue, and it's innervated by nerves. So if you have a very high adrenaline output, the stomach and the intestines are going to have a hypermobility. Dr. Eitingen said, you're going to have cramps, you're going to have diarrhea because the muscles there are being overactivated. So if you get in a rage or you're staying in a constant state of resentment and bitterness, you're kind of holding that stress, this is eating your guts. You're eating yourself up from the inside out. According to this, don't eat yourself alive. Eat yourself alive. Don't do it. Don't do it. According to Dr. William Berg, a clinical psychologist and professor at the Yale School of Medicine, small changes in your routine can help mitigate those risks. Almost impossible to avoid feelings of anger, but meditation, breath work, fitness, and getting a full night's rest are all helpful ways to manage anger, Dr. Berg said. If we all grew up understanding that, as I alluded earlier, we probably wouldn't be as stressed and angry as we are, he said. So it's a short article. It makes 3 solid points. There are full books written on any of those points. Well, let's just try to understand that the work that we're doing as a bodhisattva, the work that we're doing on the compassion path, on the giving path, on the compassion as the absolute path, not just the compassion as the relative path, Not just compassion, there's a me and a you, and I'm going to care and I'm going to do, and so forth, which is yes, 100%. The absolute compassion that we get to in our wisdom systems and our traditions and our trainings, such as the Dzogchen training. I've had to deal on this anger issue all my life, and I do feel certain things and stresses in my body that weren't there before. My new attitude is to even chill even more than I already have been, and to get even less willing to get jacked up about anything. Stay chill, stay calm. My therapist, who I just finished 7 or more years there with, a Jungian analyst, passed on something from the Navy SEALs. I think it's like this: slow is steady, steady is smooth is fast. So I'm just going to chill the fuck out and be in this space of rest, resting in the awareness of the pure atmosphere, the totality of experience, working on it, exchanging self for others, trying to do the best that's possible. This is all the antidote to anger, and working with the energy of anger rather than just blocking it and stuffing it and drinking it away. Alrighty? I hope we can be more free of anger, or more relaxed, less willing to jack ourselves up in our brain, heart, and guts. And that's why you can put your hand on your heart, you can put your hand on your belly, and just notice, hey, heart, hey, belly, hey, brain, put your hand on your brain, hey. All right, now let's all chill together. All right, everybody. Check in with you next year. Until then, peace out and namaste.